Welcome to College Knowledge, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on the college experience. I'm Dave Kozak, founder of Elite Collegiate Planning and the College Planning Network.
And I'm Joe Kearns, the most credentialed college financial advisor in the country. Each week, we give parents and high schoolers an insider look at programs, majors, and schools that are shaping the college journey.
Whether it's finding the right academic, social, or financial fit, or avoiding the pitfalls of overpaying for college, College Knowledge is here to guide you every step of the way.
This podcast is brought to you by the College Planning Network, the one-stop shop for your entire college planning journey, from building the perfect list of best fit schools to test prep, admissions, guidance, and financial aid support. CPN has you covered every step of the way.
Let's get started and build your college knowledge.
Dave, we got a good show today. Kind of give you guys an outline of what we're going to be talking about. Number one, big game changer, if you haven't heard, about NCAA scholarships. They're being shaken up. It's going to redefine what college sports looks like moving forward. DEIs, is it under fire? We're going to be diving into that a little bit today. Beyond the odds, talking about some successes that we've heard from students and families. The FAFSA season is here, Dave. We're going to dive into it. We have a special guest to discuss DEI in higher education, how colleges are moving the needle. And last but not least, as we end up, we are going to talk about a big college knowledge announcement at the end of today's show.
Ooh, cliffhanger.
Yes, sir. So as we get going, we're going to jump into our first segment of the day, College Confidential. So, Dave, I don't know if you heard this, but the NCAA Division I major changes are coming next school year if everything goes through and approved upon, everything with the recent court cases, with everything that's happening with money in the college world. You familiar with it?
I am not. Enlighten me.
So the big deal is, if you're familiar with how college scholarships have worked, you might have a baseball team with, call it 39 players on the roster, and the team gets 10 scholarships.
Yep.
And basically, depending on the sport, it can be, hey, you're only allowed to have 10 individuals that get a scholarship, or the school can say, all right, well, we can give 20 people half of a scholarship. So moving forward, the roster cap will be set for every single sport in Division I, but every single roster spot will receive a full scholarship.
Wow.
Talk about a change for the future.
It's got to be battling the NIL stuff, right?
That's exactly what it is. I believe it's part of the the settlement, and I mean there's a whole lot more into it that schools can now potentially pay athletes directly outside, because right now it's kind of outside of that. But the big thing that this changes is, like, you kind of think of like the walk-on, right? Like, oh, you're recruited, but you're not getting any money. That doesn't exist anymore. Roster spots are essentially going to be eliminated. So, for some sports, the rosters will be increased, but for other sports, like football, you might have like 140 people on a roster. Now it's going to be like 110.
Yeah, but you're going to have to, because you're going to have a cap limit on money, right?
Right, but then all 110 players on the roster will receive a full scholarship to that school.
No fooling.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is a big deal, right? Again, and that's only D1. I'm curious how that might change things from a D2 perspective. We know that D3 doesn't give athletic scholarships, but that is definitely something that, it's funny. It's actually just waiting for this approval, but I don't hear much chatter about it, because that is game changing.
I haven't heard anything about it, which is odd.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that shakes up the entirety of it. It shakes up the management. It shakes up the recruiting. It shakes up the coaching environment. And it certainly, hopefully, makes things more sticky. Yeah. Right. That's the big issue you've seen you go one football team to the next in college, and it's like, wait, wasn't that guy on that? Wait, he plays for them now?
Yeah, that whole transfer portal. It's the Wild West right now, especially with this whole NIL and transfer portal. It's pretty insane.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. We'll pay attention to that and watch it as it goes.
And another news, obviously, if you guys are familiar, but DEI has been something that has been under pressure, and pretty good article talking about University of Michigan. University of Michigan basically is pretty much known as the the biggest. Like, they have the most money diverted towards this, but things may be changing. Obviously, the states, the Supreme Court ruling that came down last year, DEI at its course has been gone through major changes based on that ruling. But as now it's starting to be implemented, I think some colleges are starting to see potentially some money that is being shifted around, some layoffs that are happening.
Yeah.
Don't know if you've heard anything about it, but interesting take on what is happening at the University of Michigan right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hot topic. It's been highly politicized. I think, I look forward to the end of the episode.
Yeah.
On the interview on it to really get a take there. So
yeah. So hey, scholarships, DEI. That's what we're talking about today on the College Confidential. So, and that brings us to our next piece of the show, our brag board. So, we talk with a lot of families. We have success stories. Anything that's happening in your world right now, something you can brag about a little bit for someone?
Yeah, well, I had a fantastic Ivy League story. Watch out. Had a family came in. Both parents had retired. They wanted to figure out whether they would be able to afford University of Pennsylvania in this particular instance. They had some things that were out of whack. We did some planning. Daughter got into Penn, paid $9,000 a year based on the planning we did for the University of Pennsylvania. Otherwise, they'd have paid about $75,000 a year. So huge success. Got through 4 years. She actually just sent me the letter that she had graduated from Penn. So that's a reflective story, but one that, the thank you came in the mail. So
love it.
Cool stuff.
Yeah, I got almost a kind of a similar story, but I did have a family that was very concerned. Their son was looking at Lehigh and, was using their net price calculator. Got to meet with them, sit down. We started doing some financial planning. Son is concerned that he's not sure if he wants to do early decision or not because, hey, they might say you can afford this and might not be on the hook. So he's opted not to do early decision. We're waiting to see what happens with the acceptance. But my little success story was in talking with the families. They're in the net price calculator. And, I jokingly say sometimes with that, it can be a great tool, but if it's garbage in, you get garbage out
for sure.
And so they were answering some of these questions that were not correct, including assets that shouldn't be included. And then I walked them through some strategies to essentially kind of shift their picture even more. My success, and hopefully this is what comes to fruition if he gets accepted. But the net price calculator before we did our stuff was at $57,000 a year. And after, it's now down to $27,000.
Oh yeah, $30,000 banger right there.
That's $120,000 over 4 years that potentially can be saved. Or the way that I look at it, the reality is if that school did ask him to pay $57,000, he wasn't going. Like that, the family wasn't going to afford it. They weren't going to let him go into debt. They're close to retirement. Yeah. So that is where it makes a potential dream come true. And that's why I love doing what I do. So
that's awesome. If you have a story of success, we want to hear about it. Please, we'd love to highlight them on the brag board. So send them in, please.
Absolutely. Great week in this week's brag board.
Yes, sir.
Now it's time for our quick sip, Dave. Time for our quick sip. Dave, I'm going to throw one at you. FAFSA was finally open. Thoughts?
I'll believe it when it's over. No, I mean, the FAFSA itself has been an absolute sort of nightmare for the last 2 years. I'm hopeful that they got it. I know that it went into the final stage of beta test. It came out of the final stage very quickly. I'm assuming that means that it's ready to rock, but time will tell, Joe.
My hot take on this one is I'm seeing all these articles touting how great the Department of Education is for being ahead of schedule.
I got to drink to that
one. In case you don't know, guys, the original launch date of this FAFSA was October 1st of 2022.
Yeah.
So way to go, guys. You're ahead of your schedule 2 years and 2 months
late.
but you're 2 weeks ahead of schedule, so kudos to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we need to talk about last year's? Oh my God. It's supposed to go October 1, 23. Then it goes to December 1, 23. Then it goes to January 1, 23. Then they did not have it completed until August of 23, and still it was broken. So I don't know who's giving kudos there, but not in my book.
Yeah. That's been this week's Quick Sip.
Hey everyone, the topic of this week's interview is DEI in higher education. We have a great guest to discuss the subject matter. It's the Vice Provost for Inclusion Excellence at the University of Vermont, Dr. Amir Ahmed. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Sure.
Yeah.
So why don't you take this and start?
Yeah, well, I mean, as far as your piece, I mean, right away we were kind of talking about your title, and then all of a sudden there was a change. So I'm guessing that this is something that is obviously probably a hot topic right now in your world, without a doubt. So catch us up to speed on kind of, number one, your role, your position. We want to learn more about this. So I guess kind of let's jump in feet first here, because I'm sure it's something you're familiar with speaking about.
Yeah, well, yeah, as you know, as you mentioned, it's kind of a hot topic, especially as related to higher education. And our name change, my division is now called the Division of Inclusive Excellence. We used to be called the Division of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion.
Yeah.
And really, that name change, irrespective of the climate around us, better reflects the work that we do out of our division with our campus partners around the university, including our colleagues in enrollment. What we really do is we serve as a consultative resource for every part of the university in developing strategies to embed inclusive practices into every aspect of what we do with faculty, staff, and students. And because to create a supportive environment for students, it's not just about how we work with students, right? It's about building our capacity amongst our faculty and staff in order to create more supportive environments for our students of all different backgrounds who enter our institution, whether that's in the residence halls, whether that's in the classroom. We want our faculty and staff to have the tools that they need to support every kind of student that walks through our door. It's incredibly important. And the idea of inclusive excellence is that we do that in order to be a more academically excellent institution, right? That historically, the idea of diversity was at odds with the idea of academic excellence, that we have to lower standards, that we're not as academically excellent if we diversify our institution. But really, the truth of the matter is that through inclusion, through the harnessing of all the backgrounds, experiences, ideas that come from so many different trajectories of life and experiences and backgrounds, through the facilitation of that in the classroom, in the out of classroom experience, through the encounters, conversations, experiences that we have with one another, that it creates more, there's more creativity, there's more innovation, there's more perspectives considered as we problem solve the challenges of the world that we face today. And through that process, we're able to get to a different level of academic excellence so that we're actually considering as many perspectives, backgrounds, identities, and experiences as related to the world and the challenges that we face in our world.
Sure. So I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I would say that probably one of the biggest concerns that people may have, maybe they're uninformed, but is that idea that you said, the lowering of standards, right? Essentially, hey, we've got to meet a quota. The only way we can do that is to sacrifice somebody that is of the caliber to let someone else have a position, a role, and acceptance to meet, a specific quota. Right? Like, I think that's where the heart of going against this concept is. And I think you hit on it. Is that really the biggest myth that revolves around this, that it's really not about that?
I think that's a great word for it, a myth. Higher education does not have quotas. I mean, I've been in the work for over a couple of decades now. There's never been a time in which I've been working in higher education in which quotas existed.
Sure.
I think they may have existed before I was born. I
Okay.
mean, I'm in my mid 40s. Um, I've never lived in a world in which quotas in higher education are present. The world that I do live in is thinking about what is the environment that we create in higher education to foster a diverse set of experiences, perspectives, and backgrounds to help us get to a more innovative, creative, and academically excellent place. Do I think that there are people that have engaged in higher education related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and in the name of diversity, equity, inclusion, limited speech, limited conversation, limited perspectives in the name of that? Yes, there are people who have done that, and I think those are people that have done incredible damage to my profession and to my field. I know you're talking about the access question, but like you said, it's a myth. But the next piece of that is that once we're all here, right? How do we foster an environment where we have hard conversations, where we challenge one another, but we also do so in a way with the recognition that we're all not going to look at every single thing the same way, and that's okay. I think where some of the tensions come in, and maybe some of where the passions come in that often have kind of resulted in limiting speech at times, has been accounting for history, right? That we have, especially in this country, we have a really challenging history that have limited access to some groups versus others. And so, how do we have those conversations that try to address those things that can be respectful, but also honest, right? In a way that we're not dismissing the humanity of anybody in that process. This is the world we've inherited. So none of us created this world. So like, I'm a man, and I didn't create patriarchy. It's existed for over 10,000 years. I benefit from it, but I'm not responsible for the fact that that has happened. But as a man, I need to be thinking about, okay, what is my role in relationship to others as related to that, right? Because maybe there's blind spots that I have. Maybe there's things that I haven't considered. And if you think about problem solving challenges, if I haven't considered those things, maybe the solutions to challenges that I'm thinking of is not considering a certain set of experiences that are not my own, right? And so if we have that diverse set of experiences and perspectives, we need that to holistically engage, address, and solve problems and challenges. And now today at University of Vermont, we actually don't have a lot of male students relatively. And so we now have a men and masculinity coordinator position in our Women and Gender Equity Center that reports to me because we need to foster and support healthy masculinity, and we need to strengthen enrollment of men who are now underrepresented in a number of institutions, including my own. And so, because it's not helpful for us to be 2/3 women as an institution, because then there's a perspective that's also not adequately being represented, and so it prevents us from being able to foster the types of conversations that we need to have to be able to holistically address problems and challenges.
So you brought up the patriarchy conversation and the perspective on things, right? How do you foster, or I guess the part that I try to understand as much as possible is, like, we didn't create it.
Yeah.
Things exist. Things get to a certain point, sometimes by bad actors, sometimes by nature, sometimes just by existence. What should we be doing to, like, talk about that stuff. And I'll go a step further is, if the patriarchy existed, do we discover and do we talk about why, how it was created and where it came from? And is it something that matters or doesn't matter? Should it exist, not exist? Like, how do you expand on that stuff in like this discussion of trying to be inclusively excellent? Excellent. Sorry.
So I mean, I think that one of the things that I think is really hard for a lot of folks to really wrap their head around are how systems work, and and how historical systems embed into our society that create inequities in our society in terms of access, opportunity, and then you couple that with the fact that we all have biases, right? That we can potentially have a tendency of preferring people who we can relate to more, or that we identify with more, right?
Yeah.
And we may not be accounting for the fact that there's a history and there are systems that create barriers, challenges, and opportunities for some and not others that differ. That doesn't not mean that there's no opportunity for certain people and all opportunity for. So that's the other thing, is that looking at things in the binary are really unhelpful in our work. And we see that from multiple directions that we see. And this is part of what has caused some folks in the name of DEI to shut down conversations in a way that has not been very helpful. But we also see that in those who may be very uncomfortable with us even having the conversation about the fact that there is a real history that has shaped and influenced and impacted the world that we live in today. We need to be able to acknowledge that history, look at that history, understand it, so that we're not unintentionally replicating that history and reinforcing it today, so that we can aspire and work towards a world that doesn't look like that, right?
Yeah.
But we don't need to do so in a way that makes people feel bad simply for being born into the world as an unintentional beneficiary of that history, right? And so that's why we need to be able to have dialogue. We need to be able to have the space. And so one of the things we're doing at University of Vermont is that we have an initiative called Intergroup Dialogue, in which we are teaching our faculty, our staff, and our students how to facilitate dialogues, in which we are able to hold multiple perspectives, right? And but that's based on facts, right? Based on things that are real, that have happened in the world, that have translated us into us having different experiences, right? So how do we stay in sustained dialogue over time, in which we build relationships, because that's key. Because one part of the element of the world that we live in today, in terms of our inheritance of the world, is that we're not always positioned to be able to hear and learn about experiences that are very different from our own through relationship, through the fact that I'm here sitting with you week in, week out, learning about each other's experiences, and along the way being like, you're not a bad person, right? We're building the level of trust in this dialogue that I can see that you're a good person, but we have very different experiences. And how do we come to a better understanding of each other and each other's experiences, in order to be able to think about the world around us, the challenges that we agree exist in the world around us, and how do we find ways to address that accounts for all these different experiences and perspectives? That's the goal of inclusive excellence.
So I think and maybe it's a fine line, but at what point, when we talk about, there's a history, right? Obviously everywhere has a history, right? Everyone's history across the entire globe is not pretty, right? The United States isn't unique in that our past might not be the best, right? Like it's across the world. But at what point do we use that? And again, I'm being blunt because it's a straight question. is that essentially that's a crutch that's used outside of personal responsibility and accountability, right? That there's, when you kind of say, oh, it's the system is the reason I'm not getting ahead, not the fact that maybe you didn't work hard enough. Like, I understand that there's different backgrounds, there's different experiences, but the equal opportunities versus equal outcome is very different. And if we don't have all the same outcome of certain things, right, that's life. That, and that's where I don't know if trying to fix the outcome side of things, right, or trying to fix the opportunity side of things. But do we use this past and we say, hey, 200 years ago, this was it, and that's why I'm not succeeding today? Like, is that a crutch, or is that something that we need to truly, understand the more your experience in your lifetime, not what happened 200 years ago when our families weren't even in this country?
Right. So this goes into the binary, right? Of that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you to define that for me, because I didn't quite understand.
Right.
Looking at things in the
moving away from the either or. It's not one or the other. That really part of what inclusive excellence is about moving into the complexity, which is part of what we're supposed to do in higher education. Develop a more complex and nuanced understanding of problems, challenges, and issues that exist in our world in order to be able to come up with more innovative solutions to those challenges.
Sure.
Right. And so the history from 200 years ago does not exist in a vacuum in relationship to today. There's the evolution. So let's just get very clear, right? We had enslavement in this country, right? Yep. We had Reconstruction. Then we had the ending of Reconstruction, and then moving into Jim Crow, right? Then we had the Civil Rights Act. And then there were different kinds of political and social responses as related to that time and era. And so history does not just end and then just restart in a different place, right? And that's part of what I was talking about, the systems piece. And I think that's where a lot of folks struggle, because it's an abstract concept, right? But
it also requires a knowledge of all of that, right? And
exactly.
I don't think we have enough knowledge of all of that.
Which is why education is so important, is that we actually learn about those things, and we learn about them with a realistic understanding of the implications of it, right? And that it's not over-determinate. It doesn't mean that we don't have free will as human beings and the ability to be able, it doesn't mean that we don't have agency as a human being, right? That history does not mean that I am simply subject to the implications of that history, and therefore I am disempowered. And think about, look, I have multiple degrees in Black Studies, okay? Think about the likelihood of Black people being where they are today, considering what they have been through and what they've been subjected to as a people in this country, right? What are the odds that they would even be where they are today if there was not a sense of possibility and ability to be able to push through the obstacles and the challenges that Black people have continually faced in this country, right? That is not a attitude of I am simply a subjugated to this system and I have no agency in my ability to in relationship to that. But we also just can't act like those obstacles are being put in front of people, right? And so we have to be able to hold both of those things to be true at the same time. Okay. That there are things that are making things harder for some people, and people have agency in relationship to how they navigate that. So let me give you, because you brought the equality of outcome. Yeah. And I hear this a lot. So let's get really down to the crux of how, on a very specific level. Do we accept that it is okay that Black women have a higher mortality rate as related to their pregnancies than other populations in our country? Are we okay with that? Because if we say that we don't want to address the historical and structural implications of that history, we can't look at the data that makes it very clear that Black women are having distinctly different health outcomes as related to very specific aspects of their health, and infant mortality and so forth and so on, if we can't agree that that's what the data is saying, we can't develop the solutions to address that inequity in our society, right? And so this is part of why when a lot of people talk about these conversations, it's oftentimes not getting down to the specific implications of some of these societal inequities that we have in our society.
So let me ask you a question on that, because you asked the question of, is it okay? No, it's not okay. Why is it happening?
But that's the point of higher education. I'm not an expert in public health or in the medical field, but the point of higher education is for us to have people who are engaged in education that are looking at data, looking at implications of history in relationship to what is happening today, and how does that help us understand and problem solve the challenge that we face in the world today. This is part of what I was saying. Climate change.
Yeah, no, but I'm trying to understand on that piece, like the next question I ask, no matter what the outcome is, well, why did it happen? How did it get there? I'm a business owner, right? I do those analytics all day, every day, trying to figure out, hey, the event we just hosted failed. We wasted $10,000. Why did it happen? So there's a history.
There's a history of Black women not getting the health and medical care that they need. There's also a history of Black women not being listened to when they express that they're experiencing something in pain. This is documented. There's data in the healthcare field of numerous examples of different kinds of health inequities. Black women disproportionately are being subject to hysterectomies when they're not medically necessary. And so that is part of what the work that's happened in higher education is. Let's try to understand that. Let's try to understand why it's happening, where it comes from, so that we can problem solve. But the one thing that I know is that if you don't have people from those types of backgrounds represented in the places and spaces where those conversations are happening, that are connected to the communities that are subject to those implications, that what happens is that there is problem solving that's not accounting for a set of experiences and realities and perspectives that are necessary to actually come up with good solutions, right? It's us coming together as a community, as a society, to say we're going to work together, because there's all sorts of people who come up with well-intended solutions to challenges but aren't accounting for perspective and experiences, and it actually turns out to have not the implications that they want, right? And this is something that has been a challenge for higher education historically, is people coming up with solutions for people they don't know or understand, right? And this is just as equally true around challenges in Appalachia, right? If you don't have someone that is coming from that kind of background and experience, but there's people who are coming up with solutions for people in Appalachia who don't really know or understand the realities that people in Appalachia are navigating. How the heck are you going to come up with ideas and solutions for what needs to happen there, right? Sure. And so, so these principles, they apply for everybody, right? And that's part of even why I made the point that we have created a men and masculinity position, because we're seeing less men go to higher education, and we need men to engage in higher education. We need men to be part of problem solving, because men are also facing challenges. How do we better understand those things, and how do we better address those factors? And so I think that the work that I do has been overly politicized, right? It has been overly conflated, and I'm saying on multiple directions. Right? There are people in multiple directions that over-conflate the work that my profession is about to one-to-one to politics. I don't view my work as about electoral politics. I view my work as fostering the environment we need in higher education to address the complex challenges we face in our world, like climate change, like public health issues, like other factors, and that we need the best and the brightest. And we need pathways to become the best and brightest from all different walks of life for us as a country to lead on these challenges that we face in the world.
Yeah. So I just want to touch on a couple of things there. Number one, the initial question that you asked, right? I immediately go kind of where Dave went. I would have so many questions because I would want to understand it, right? I would have, okay, well, let's dive into the data. Where, where's the numbers coming from? Like, I would really want to understand before I truly gave not the opinion of saying it needs to be addressed, right? Like, absolutely. If that's an issue, if that's my role and I want to know why, well, I got to do some research. I don't take things at face value. Critical thinking, right? Taking a statement and saying, okay, well, let me understand what that actually means. And then I would really be diving in. The piece that I can try and relate to here, talking about personal stories, but when you say like someone that's trying to solve the problem without diving in, it immediately, years ago, I was a store manager at the Sports Authority, right? A sporting goods chain. Mm-hmm. And once a year, you would have the CEO come and visit your store and immediately tell you, well, that's your problem, that's your problem, that's your problem. And all of his solutions, I was like, well, the solution to that problem is what you just gave me cannot happen. It's just, you say this woman at the counter wants to work in apparel, right? Well, she's not available at the hours that I need somebody in apparel, right? Like it's just the higher up doesn't know the day to day. And their solutions will not connect. So I get what you're saying as far as from the experience side. And if you want to truly solve a problem, you have to speak to somebody that is living that day to day to try and come up with the proper solution. So I thought it was just a little, analogy that I can make that I thought would hit home for kind of that experience, to realize where some solutions come aren't necessarily truly solving the problem if you don't have that in person where, talking on the ground with those people experiencing it.
Yeah, you're fostering so many ideas that are so connected to my work. So one of the things that we do is where we really kind of connect some of these principles to leadership development. And, you may be familiar with ideas of transactional versus transformational leadership, where transactional tends to be more top down and kind of, I'm paying you, so I expect you to do X, Y, and Z. Transformational leadership tends to be more bottom up. That's really harnessing people's experiences who are looking at different kinds of problems or challenges that's happening in an organization that maybe the higher up doesn't really see or understand because they're not sitting in that. So you have to draw from people's experiences. You got to draw from whole people, and some people say, well, we should all be transformational. And transformational leadership is more inclusive, right? Because it's harnessing who people are and what their experiences are, their backgrounds, and that shapes their lens and experiences. But you do need to be transactional sometimes, right? So the example I give is the emergency room, right? When I need a scalpel, right? So, but the transformational leadership happens before the transactional. That we build the trust with each other, the relationships, right? That we learn a little bit about each other in order for us to have the trust with one another to be transactional when we need to be transactional to get things done, right? So that's one thing. The other piece about the data piece, couldn't agree with you more. We are at University of Vermont. Since I've been here, I've been there 3.5 years. My first 2 years, we created the first ever data-driven inclusive excellence action plan for the entire university. Every part of the university created their own plan that embeds into their overall strategies for their part of the university, right? And that comprises our institutional strategy, not tactics, but strategy, right? Tactics are important to support a strat, but they need to support a strategy. We need to be rowing in the same direction, right? To get us overall, and we need data to inform that. But I think your example is really apt because different people can interpret that very same data differently based on the experiences and backgrounds that they come from, right? And so that's the reason why we do need to be fact-based, we do need to be data-driven, and we need as many different perspectives and ideas looking at that to be able to say, okay, so then what are solution-oriented possibilities when we account for all these perspectives? Because when I'm looking at it, I'm not thinking about, well, what is that decision going to mean for women? But but then there might be someone else who's said, and the thing is that here's the thing, because some people think diversity in of itself is the goal. Okay, you can have a group of diverse people, but if you have an environment where people don't feel like they can bring their perspective forward, they're not going to share it. Right? You have to have transformational leadership in which people feel like, oh, I'm valued enough to where you want to hear what I have to actually say, right? You want to account for that, even if it's not the answer. So for myself, I lead a team of people, right? And I want them to share what they think, right? I don't want them to be yes people. I don't want them to feel afraid of sharing a counter perspective to mine. So I need to create an environment where they want to bring those things forward so we can harness what makes their experience and perspective different from my own so that we can collectively problem solve in a better way. So that's the reason why diversity in of itself is not the goal. It's inclusion that helps us harness all those experiences, because you can have as diverse of a group as you want, but if the boss is basically saying it's my way or the highway, there's no value to that diversity because everyone's just falling in line. And what makes us different from each other doesn't benefit the organization in that environment.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, we call it our quick six. It's 6 questions we ask all of our guests, not necessarily on this topic, right? But just in general, we're going to run through these questions. Thank you so much for, I would say, enlightening us and breaking this down. I think a lot of our listeners will get value from maybe what they think this is versus what we just talked about. So greatly appreciate your perspective. But as we go through our 6 questions, we can kind of hit them back and forth here, Dave. But what is one piece of college advice you would give, but most people would disagree with?
That some of the best things that you learn are outside of the classroom.
You want to take number 2?
If you could take one college class again, just for fun, what would it be?
Ethnomusicology.
Cool.
What's the weirdest college tradition you've ever witnessed or participated in?
I witnessed it's like a naked bike ride or thing that they do at UVM. I didn't want to witness that, but it's definitely a thing.
What's one skill you learned in college that you still use today?
Recognizing that there's always more context.
And my last one, what's one thing about college that you think should change?
In an ideal world, I would want every single person to study abroad in a place that is outside of the West, outside of Europe, and the United States, or Australia.
Yeah.
And then my favorite question, best, favorite, or most influential book you've ever read?
Probably the autobiography of Malcolm X. It was life-changing for me.
We've heard that one a couple times. Yeah, that's a great one. Well, thank you so much for your insight. This was great. I learned a lot today. I know that my big takeaway is, and I've heard it from a few guests, but the idea of open dialogue, the idea of understanding, not pushing down speech, not shouting down, extremely valuable for a variety of reasons. But the idea of what you discussed today, I would say definitely enlightening and helped, even me learn a little bit more about the subject matter. So thank you very much for today.
Thank you all. Thanks for leaning in. I really
got it.
Yeah.
Tough times to do stuff, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right, Joe, let's talk about the lessons learned today.
Yeah.
I want to go back to a couple of things that I thought were interesting. I'm very intrigued by the NCAA rule changes. I'm going to be paying attention to that and see how that affects the overall movement in Division I athletes. I had some takeaways from the DEI interview with Dr. Ahmed. There is a place for inclusion and thought, and I think his point that I took away the most was, he's trying to differentiate himself in terms of what DEI and in this case inclusive excellence is about. And self-admittedly, he said it went rogue in a lot of places, and there were some bad actors in it, but at its core, it's not a bad thing. I think that's the takeaway for me. I'm all about open dialogue, so it was nice to be able to talk to someone, get their opinion, perspective on it.
Yeah, and I think that was probably the biggest thing there. I wasn't quite sure what to accept because of, I think, some of the misconceptions, and you hear DEI and you say, okay, and I hit on it. It's like, is it a quota? Are we lowering standards where now someone that is deserving is being their spot taken away? I think that's everyone's biggest concern when you kind of hear those three letters right now. So again, as you stated, I think open discussion and critical thinking and, taking the idea of a solution, a problem solving you need to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. That concept is not one that's ever been lost. I just have never put it into terminology of inclusion.
Yeah.
So
and again, my takeaway has been our sort of stance all along is open dialogue. Like I want critical debate. I want people to be able to come from different perspectives and give it to us. That's what this whole podcast is about. So
yeah, and again, I liked it. I learned some things. It wasn't piece, but I think the other big takeaway that you hit on for me was that there are some bad apples that have given this a bad name, and that happens with everything. Especially if anything ever gets taken to an extreme. Something gets misunderstood and then people roll with it. It doesn't matter what it is. It leads to bad outcomes.
But I also think you have to be critical about it, right?
Yes.
From both perspectives, because there are the bad actors, there are the good actors in it. And, the one thing I would say is I didn't leave that interview and say, okay, I get it. I understand it. This is how it is. Because I think to his point, this isn't how it is everywhere. Some places have gone polar one side, polar the other side. But it is a politicized subject matter. So it's something that I think, parent, if you're concerned about it, that it's a question you got to ask. It's something you got to do on the tour. It's something you got to investigate at the institution itself, because I think it is going to be unique institution to institution.
Yeah. And I mean, if you are concerned with that, and if that's something that is on the high topic list for you, I mean, look, you read comments, on our different social media pages. College isn't worth it. It just brainwashes kids. Well, if that's a concern, if this is something that you got to go there with an open mind and talk to people. And if you don't like how the conversation goes, then at least you don't just assume. So I definitely think that's a great golden nugget takeaway from today's episode that you just dropped, sir. Definitely
awesome.
Looking at that. So lastly, guys, college knowledge, Dave and I, we have some big news for all of our listeners and for anybody that is a listener that might even have friends or family that's going to be preparing for college. Dave, what do we got coming on?
Before we wrap up, the exciting news, Joe and I are going to host a college planning masterclass Tuesday, January 14th at 8 p.m. It's a one-time event designed for families with students younger than high school seniors.
That's right, and seats for this event are going to be limited. So when the registration does eventually open for this, be on the lookout because you'll definitely want to join us as we break down key steps to navigating the college planning process and maximizing financial aid opportunities.
Yeah, keep an eye out for the registration details. We'll let you know as soon as it opens. We can't wait to see you.
And it's your chance. Hey, new year, 2025. Started off with the knowledge and tools to set your family up for success. Do not miss it. That's pretty much all we got for today's episode, Dave. I think it was a good one, sir.
Loved it, Joe. This has been College Knowledge, everybody.
Until next time, stay safe, stay strong, stay sane. We can just end it there.
And remember, as you prep for college, knowledge is power, and so is planning. See you next week.